you're in London.
I am, yeah.
You're in the Trashfuture studio right now.
I am. I really am. That is true.
We can definitely say that.
Have you conquered London's underground EDM scene entirely, or is there at least one club you haven't raved at yet?
I'm figuring it out as I go along.
Josh texted me on Thursday. I was busy taking care of some stuff, but I gave him a bunch of recommendations of like restaurants and stuff, places to go. The next thing I know, I see on Josh's Instagram story that he's at the fucking Salmon and Ball pub doing karaoke. Now, the Salmon and Ball pub is like the equivalent of going to karaoke at like fucking Satriali's pork store. Like I'm so like, it's like just a fucking geezer football pub. To be honest, I can't believe they even have a karaoke night. That was my first.
And here's what I found too is yes, it's karaoke on Thursday nights, but only if there isn't a West Ham United game going on. If West Ham is playing, there is no karaoke.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the worst of all possible worlds, the first and only podcast about footy scran. I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. And yes, joining me here in the studio, live from London, England, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, it is Northern Ireland? Northern
Ireland.
It is the one, the only Milo Edwards.
It's great to be here.
Join us.
Why don't I just do the whole podcast in this kind of accent?
So I'm glad that you're both here because you must be very tired from attending Coronation yesterday.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Those crowns are heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Heavy are the heads that wear them as well.
Heavy are they indeed? Yeah, Milo, what was your coronation experience? We didn't talk about that really.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of passed me by, really. Yeah. I mean, we watched a bit of it this morning, but we missed the procession, which is kind of the cool bit, and then it was just the stuff in the chapel, which was very boring. And they also had Rishi Sunak, our supply teacher, prime minister, doing a reading. Now,
what did he do? What did he read?
Something from the Bible. You would have recognized it. I would not. It wasn't one of the famous. It was very much an album track from the Bible. You know, it wasn't one of the bits you recognized.
Yeah, deep cut.
Yeah. And I didn't realize before. Yeah. Because Rishi Sunak has nerd voice.
Yes.
But I realized that he also has a bit of a lisp. So he's like going, guys, this is a momentous occasion. He sounds like fucking Dean Lerner. It's very thematically appropriate. He sounds like Dean Lerner.
Yes, well, to the point of Dean Lerner, that is a character in the show that we are talking about today, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, the Channel 4 classic.
Darkplace?
Darkplace.
Now, if you are an American, you might know Darkplace because it was on the Sci-Fi Channel very briefly. Back in like the late 2000s?
I know it because it was on Adult Swim.
Oh, it got an Adult Swim run too.
Wow.
Okay.
Because they brought over the Mighty Boosh and they brought over Darkplace around, I want to say 2006 or 2007, a few years after it aired.
Yeah, right when it came out on DVD, I think. It coincided with the DVD release.
Yeah, Darkplace has aged a lot better, I have to say.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
When I first saw Darkplace, because it was a few years after this had happened, I assumed that it was a riff on Stephen King's Kingdom Hospital. Doing the work for this episode, I found out Stephen King's Kingdom Hospital came out 3 months later.
Really? Huh.
Stephen King watched Garth Marenghi.
Right, exactly.
And just ripped it off.
Yeah, he made a serious version.
The only thing that this is missing is giant anteaters.
Well, you got to have those to control the giant ants.
Of course.
It's like the Australian approach to biosecurity, where every new invasive species, they have to release another invasive species to catch it. An old woman swallowed a fly. You got big ants, you need the big anteaters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to give a mouse a cookie of horror. So Milo, you have a long and storied history with this show in that it was very sort of foundational for your comedy.
Yeah, I wrote it.
Holy shit!
Yeah, no, but I remember too. We were talking. Milo, you and I went out for karaoke when you were in New York, and we got to talking about the show. And I think you floated the idea of doing Darkplace, if I recall correctly. Or I was like,
Probably,
what are the big comedy influences in your life? So yeah, tell us a bit more about like what Darkplace has meant for you, why you like it so much, and what going back to it maybe felt like too for this.
I got back into it, or I got into it in the first place at university, which is kind of when I also started doing comedy. So when I was about 18, I think I'd been into Alan Partridge for a while at that point, which is the other. I think for a comedian, I'm not actually someone who like watches a huge amount of comedy because for me, the experience of being a comedian has just made me like exceptionally, in a way that like people who are really annoying about music only like atonal jazz.
Right.
I've like gotten to that point with comedy where like the only comedy I like is either like incredibly high concept or it's like the dumbest shit imaginable. Like I was making Josh listen. I picked him up in my car. I was making him listen to this Australian podcast that I've become obsessed with, which is just one Australian comedian who is a complete lunatic.
Oh yeah,
like, that is what everyone on the Australian comedy scene, they're like, oh yeah, Wolfie, he's a fucking lunatic. And it's just like, and this other comedian who just like asks him the kind of questions a therapist would ask. And then he's just going off on this rant. Like the other day he's going off on something about how he gets stopped for drink driving by the police and he starts doing star jumps and stuff to try and make it go down. And he's like, there's no law against it. It's just a bit of F45, mate. And then like, just imagine just yelling that at the cops. Anyway, so it's either that or it's stuff that's extremely weird, like Darkplace or Alan Partridge.
But I feel like Darkplace too, like it's very silly but it's also high concept in a way. Like it kind of merges those sensibilities in a way.
I think like a great way to understand it is a lot of people confuse things which are, I guess, like comedy in a straightforward way and things which are pastiche. Like, and I think Darkplace is definitely pastiche. Like, we had a conversation about it once in the about musical comedy. How like musical comedy is always bad unless it's pastiche. Like if it's musical comedy, like it's a song about how to make a cup of tea, it's always terrible, right? But if it's musical comedy where it's like it's a song that's taking the piss out of a type of music, that's funny. Like, and I think Darkplace is that in a show. It's like it's taking the piss out of a type of TV show, and it's kind of like making that, and it's like pushing to the boundaries. Like it's taking the piss out of like pretentious writers and directors, but also of like low budget TV shows, and like the constant like low effort misogyny in the show that's like taking the piss out of 80s TV is like really funny. And yeah, we got obsessed with it at university. We used to host like parties where we would just watch Darkplace and like play. We had a drinking game, but I can't remember what the rules were.
I did watch my first episode, I think, of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace in college. I think it was like one of those early uploads to YouTube. I remember watching it on
I think
YouTube.
it's still on YouTube. The short-lived spin-off, the Man-to-Man with Dean Lerner, is also currently on YouTube in its entirety.
And I think those uploads are not accessible in the UK on YouTube.
Oh, sure.
You can just watch them on Channel 4's website for free. If you're in the US, you can pull it up on YouTube, no problem.
You can also, I watched it on Peacock, which they have not calibrated the commercial breaks very well.
Oh, no.
So it would often be mid-joke that a commercial would
terrible.
cut in.
I hate that.
The Amazon Prime stream is fine.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
All right, well, get your Darkplace, folks.
Yeah.
It's so hard to memify the show because what makes it so special is seeing everything play out in the context of the thing. Like, you can't memify Richard Ayoade holding a baseball bat, which then transforms into a coffee cup and then transforms into a baseball bat in literally the next shot.
Right.
Like, it's just, it requires like your full attention in a way that I think that a lot of modern comedy doesn't, because the whole thing is built like a fucking Swiss watch.
Yeah.
It's timing, it's precision, it's the way that jokes build on each other, and jokes in later episodes build on earlier episodes.
And also because there's so many layers of what it's doing.
Right.
You've got the show itself, but then also the show within a show, like the Darkplace, which is being done as cast and crew commentary.
Right.
So you've got the actors are playing the actors in scare quotes, who are then playing further characters in the show. And then like the way it cuts between those like 3 levels of reality.
It's interesting because this seems like a point in time where quite a few shows were coming from the Fringe Festival. And that's exactly how Garth Marenghi's whole thing started, with 2 stage shows.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I've read some reviews and everyone seemed to love them, but I don't know much more beyond those.
I found an article in The Guardian that Rachael Healy wrote, and it seems to be like the only piece of like journalism about the creation of the show that I could find. So it's like, it is like the one source for all this. But basically, Matthew Holness, who plays Garth Marenghi, he started Garth Marenghi as a character at a cabaret at Cambridge when he was going to university. And he put that sort of aside because, you know, it was just a monologue that he would go up on stage and just scream at the audience, I assume, about how only cowards use subtext and then he would leave. Right. Then he decided to pursue sketch comedy, but found it to be like this sort of like very empty abyss that he would just throw ideas, and it just wasn't particularly satisfying. But through that, he met Richard Ayoade, and they started to develop this show together where basically Ayoade would introduce Garth Marenghi as his publisher.
Oh, so he was Dean Lerner all the way back then, from the very beginning. Okay.
From the word go. And it was more like he was a producer of Garth Marenghi's horror stage shows. So the first one that came up was you know, they did this show at a place called the Hen and Chickens Theater Pub.
Oh, yeah, it's not far from where we are now. It's on Highbury Corner.
Oh, okay. Amazing. Amazing. I was going to ask if it was still in. Wow. I was going to ask if it was still in.
We did a TF Live show there once.
Oh, really?
Years ago. Yeah, we did a joke debate show. I can't remember what it was. The debate was something to do with Elon Musk. I can't remember now. But it was like who is a greater danger, like Elon Musk or Willy Wonka or something like that.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
How many? I guess we don't have like an actual number of how many children Elon Musk has killed, but we do have a very definitive one for Willy Wonka. So while at the Hen and Chicken Theater Pub, there was an alternative comedy night that was run there by the Mighty Boosh. Okay. And that's where they met, you know, obviously the Mighty Boosh, but that's also where they met Matt Berry, who at the time was just doing like quote, weird Victorian characters. I couldn't really find any clips from his early days, but it does seem to be like that was his whole comedy shtick.
Well, Matt Berry's first like gigs were doing stuff on .tv, like doing sketches.
I was reading about this, like a gaming thing.
Yeah, the UK version of Tech TV, right? Or G4 or whatever.
It was on Sky, but I'd never heard of this .tv thing. Even though like we had Sky as a kid, which is like kind of British cable.
Right.
But I'd not come across this.
Yeah, not large profile at all.
And this show really was Matt Berry's big breakout role, right? Like people saw him in this being the goofy guy who he is, and they were like, we want more of this very silly man.
He was 29 years old when he filmed this. Yeah. You know, so
he's a real baby in this.
And now he's part of the juggernaut that is What We Do in the Shadows.
Right. And what I will say is, if for any of our American listeners who have been watching What We Do in the Shadows and you marvel at the vocal tricks that Matt Berry does in that show, give Garth Marenghi a watch.
Yes.
I don't fundamentally understand how he is able to do the things he does with his voice in this show. They bring on Alice Lowe to play Madeline Bull and Liz Asher in the show. And she had no interest in doing comedy. She was a dramatic and very serious actor. Yes. She had never done it before.
That's
which
amazing.
Is
She's
frankly
so funny.
Unfair because she is outstandingly funny in this show. And through her, they brought on Paul King to direct the stage shows up in Edinburgh. Alice Lowe and Paul King had worked together in university, devising theater together. And that's sort of how the process went for devising the stage show. And basically, from what I can gather from the first one, Garth Marenghi's Fright Night, they basically do what they do in the series, but for theater. So it's like if the play that goes wrong never acknowledged that anything bad was happening.
Yeah.
And just kind of kept soldiering on.
It's worth noting here that Fright Night, it's KNIGHT. It's about a suit of armor, like a ghost knight.
It's a very scary night. It's a fright night.
And followed that up with the next show, which was Garth Marenghi's Netherhead.
Yes, which is where he plays a character named Ken Douglas, who that last name might sound familiar, who has to go through hell in order to get his son back, which is also the plot of a play I wrote, so I feel real dumb now. Milo, you had a show at the Edinburgh Fringe, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the experience.
More than one, God help me.
If you could speak to the experience of putting up a show there, because according to them, nobody came to see their first show. They had to invite a wait staff from the restaurant they went to that night and performed exclusively for them for like the first couple shows. And then people really started coming in droves. But what was your experience performing there?
I mean, it was probably pretty different then because we were probably talking like very early 2000s, I would think, or maybe even
literally
late
the
90s.
year 2000.
Oh, wow,
Yeah. Because the festival would have been a lot smaller then. I mean, now it's crazy. Like, I mean, there's like thousands upon thousands of shows. I mean, I was just at the Melbourne Comedy Festival in Australia, which is the second biggest comedy festival in the world, I think, after Edinburgh. And there were like 600 shows. But in Edinburgh, there's like close to 10,000. It's it's crazy. Certainly like multiple thousands of shows. I've heard it disputed how many shows there are, but I don't understand because they have to register through a central thing. So you'd think that number would just be available, but apparently not. Anyway, and so it depends a lot. I mean, it changes a lot as you do it over time. I mean, there's a lot of problems with the festival in terms of like economically speaking, like it's becoming more and more unviable because it basically just makes money for landlords. I mean, like the price of rooms for performance keeps going up and the price of rooms to stay in keeps going up to a point where like it's basically now getting to a point where it's almost impossible to make money doing a show at the Edinburgh Festival, even if you sell it out. Like there are some, I heard a story this year of a comic being offered a room at one of the big venue complexes, like a paid room. And he calculated that if he sold out the entire run at full price, he would still owe them £400.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God.
Which is just deranged. Because that's like impossible to do as well.
That's nuts.
So it's turned into the New York Fringe, where it's all just pay to play. You
no
never
longer
expect to
exists.
make money, and rest in piss, New York Fringe.
Yeah. Go fuck yourself. You still owe me money, bitch.
Milo, does that money go towards the landlords or towards the Fringe family that runs the festival?
Oh no, it all ends up in the pockets of landlords pretty much. I mean, there are some venue complexes you have more sympathy with than others. For example, like the Pleasance, they rent university property, the Edinburgh University, to do their shows, and Edinburgh University don't let them run the bar. So Edinburgh University make all the money from the bar, and the Pleasance can only make money from the room hire. But then most of that they have to give back to the university to rent the space from them. So I think the Pleasance actually doesn't make a profit. They're like kind of run on a not-for-profit basis. But so then it's just the university is scamming a bunch of money out of the acts and the punters as well because the ticket prices always go up.
Right.
Anyway, this is kind of by the by. That's just sort of background. But
yeah.
And so, when you first start doing the festival, I think getting people into your shows is like a real challenge. Like most people do flyering. So nowadays I have a production company, so they hire a bunch of flyers that work for them full time, and they'll like fly your show for 2 or 3 hours a day. And in Edinburgh that really works because people come, by and large, it's not locals who are going to the shows, it's tourists who are in town.
Right.
They're going to see shows all day. Like, again, to contrast with Melbourne, like the shows are only in the evening. It's mostly just locals who are going. Whereas in Edinburgh, the shows start at like 11 a.m. and they run till like 3 a.m.
Those 11 a.m. shows must be rough.
It's mostly kids stuff.
Right.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
My show is going to be at fucking noon this year, which
Really?
Not
Not exactly the prime slot there. That's tough.
Well, I've heard mixed reviews. Like, I don't really want to do a show at noon, but it's in a really good venue, so I've accepted noon. But the thing is that on the other hand, there's no competition at noon. So if you like, you can have like a sellout run at noon because you're getting boosted by the fact that people who want to go and see stand-up comedy at noon, there's not a lot of options.
Right.
However, will they want to go and see my show about death at noon? Who knows? We'll find out.
Maybe in the year 2000, you could sell a few tickets and maybe lose some money, but you wouldn't lose your entire shirt? Maybe? I mean, did they end up...
it was way, way, way cheaper to do a show.
Yeah.
Orders of magnitude cheaper,
Especially a show that purposefully is supposed to look bad. I mean, look, you know, sometimes shows that are purposely look bad do cost money. Like there is some stuff certainly put into that, but like in order to maintain the props because they break so often.
Yeah, they call it an
right?
Ivo Van Hove production.
Folks, Garth Marenghi's Dutch place. There we go.
Ivo Van Hove's Darkplace is just 3 hours of watching a corpse decompose.
Fuck, the last time I was at the Edinburgh Fringe, my girlfriend loves that book, A Little Life.
Yeah.
And they had Ivo Van Hove staging of A Little Life was on for a few nights. It was
did you
4
see it?
hours of A Little Life in Dutch. And that's a miserable enough play to watch in English.
They brought that shit
it-
to
They
BAM, in Brooklyn too, and it was just abysmal from what I heard.
I mean, fuck him killing himself. I wanted to kill myself by the end of that. That was pretty
That's
bad.
that's been the consensus opinion of everyone I've talked to.
You like watching people shit themselves
on stage? Come to my show. Basically, they did really well at Fringe. The Garth Marenghi crew did, and they're so successful that they came back again with Netherhead. And Matthew Holness doesn't think very highly of Netherhead. He's just like, the expectations were so high after the first one that we kind of felt it was a sophomore slump. But it was enough to get them this gig and to film for Channel 4. And so we get what happens if Alan Wake makes a TV show.
Something was pouring from his mouth. He examined his sleeve. Blood? Blood. Crimson, copper-smelling blood. His blood. 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 And bits of sick. Greetings, traveller. I'm Garth Marenghi, horror writer. Most of you will probably know me already from my extensive canon of chillers, including Afterbirth, in which a mutated placenta attacks Bristol. Back in the 1980s, I wrote, directed and starred in Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, a television programme so radical, so risky, so dangerous, so goddamn crazy, that the so-called powers that be became too scared to show it, and gypped me, much in the same way that women have done ever since they sniffed out my money. Only now, in the worst artistic drought in broadcast history, does the channel come crawling back, cap in hand and suitably ashamed, asking if your humble fabulist could once more retrieve Darkplace from the boxes in his spacious basement and let it loose on its unsuspecting public. That's you.
These openings have a uniform format. We always begin, Garth Marenghi is reading one of his books. He turns to the camera, starts talking to you about the history of Darkplace, the show. Mm-hmm. Then we see him at the top of presumably his stairs at home.
He proceeds to descend a staircase while looking at the camera.
And he doesn't know, like, you have to start moving before you start talking so that it's just like fluid motion. So he always initiates the movement of walking down the stairs. And then we find him in a closet with a can of film, presumably the episode that he is about to show you.
What's funny about listening to that intro now is that the joke about how, you know, Darkplace, unappreciated in its time, has now been dug out for the, you know, for the public in a broadcasting drought is then what actually happened to the show they were actually making, in a way. It's sort of prescient. It's almost like they knew.
It's super meta, and there's something funny about like the different layers of commentary and meta commentary there. I wanted to talk as well, just real quick, about the Garth Marenghi character and what we come to learn about him pretty quickly. Yeah. You heard about it right up front there. The guy has issues with women, like in a major fucking way. And
he's also a terrible writer.
Awful.
Yeah, the man's never rewritten a day in his life. He really is so assured in himself and his ability to chill and thrill you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what he comes up with is just the ramblings of a 6-year-old child.
Well, that's the classic line, I'm one of the few people you'll meet who's written more books than they've read.
Yes.
And we keep seeing like flashes of like photo stills in this intro of what Garth Marenghi's Darkplace was. And the first thing you see, it's a bunch of doctors and they're all holding guns. Except for the sole female doctor who never once
That's
holds
right.
a gun.
She's never armed. And this becomes a recurring thing as well. And this was something I think that maybe you had mentioned, Milo, and we were talking about it too, is like, these doctors have guns, which is, of course, funny in and of itself. But there's also something about that it's like British doctors with guns. I feel like that's another level too, right?
In Romford.
Yeah. So what? Yeah. Romford. What's that? Tell me, like, what are we as American idiots sort of missing here in terms of cultural context?
I mean, technically now it's actually part of London, but it's like a London commuter town. It's like right on the edge. And it's a very like suburban nowhere place. Like it's just like the association with Romford is like a boring suburban, like, and so it's just like a funny place for anything crazy to be happening. Just that. I think that's a lot of British comedy. I think, or like really good British comedy is focused on that side of things. And I think that's what I loved about Alan Partridge as well. Is like studying this kind of British suburban mediocrity. And like Alan Partridge is set in Norwich in Norfolk, and it's like that kind of like people who are like a big fish in a small pond kind of vibe.
Well, because Garth Marenghi is from Romford, right? That's why he writes about it. Is that what we're supposed to take away from
Matt
it?
Holness,
the character Garth Marenghi.
I don't know.
Okay,
possibly.
Yeah, like is it an exact like 1-to-1 with Stephen King in Maine is what you're asking, Josh?
Or Frank Peretti and Washington State. Yeah,
that's another thing, and we'll talk about that later. How definitely there are aspects of Garth Marenghi that reflect a lot of the weird evangelical Christian horror writers who we talk about on our show sometimes. It's a very fucking similar psychosis.
Evangelical Christian horror. That's interesting. Like sex before marriage. Like,
yes.
You're not far off. We could watch Frank Peretti and Ted Decker's House with you sometime, and that's exactly what happens.
They're little demon. They're personified by demons, basically, over your shoulder,
There's
whispering shit in your ear.
A demon of lust that will dig its claws into your shoulders and make you horny. I'm not joking.
I know that guy. My shoulder's fucked up.
His name's Carl. He's just will not leave me alone.
I fucked him, but he won't go away.
Without a producer, nobody would know who Garth Marenghi is. And in this case, Garth's producer is a man named Dean Lerner, who, as we said, is played by Richard Ayoade.
And his thing is that he was not a TV producer. He like publishes porno mags. He has like he's never even really published books beyond Garth Marenghi. He said there's 4 authors that he's published, and Garth Marenghi is the best one of the 4. And he owns, like, according to the spin-off show Man to Man with Dean Lerner, he also owns high-class gentlemen's clubs.
What I think is so interesting about this character is that at first you kind of want to believe that he earnestly like believes this and is like a good person who just got duped by this like monster, and then you slowly realize over the course of the series that he is actually the most despicable human being.
No, he's even worse. He's even worse than Garth Marenghi, like as a person, for sure. And you see this in his just constant cost-cutting measures and spoiler alert for some of Darkplace, numerous workers just die over the course of the production due to lack of sufficient safety protocols and stuff like that.
I mean, this is kind of appropriate for an NHS hospital, really. You know, rampant cost cutting and unsafe work environment. And it's become increasingly close to being a documentary as time has gone on.
Because it's mentioned in text that it did not hit in the UK, but it was really big in Peru.
Yeah, brief run in Peru,
The show within the show. Is there just context and
much like Romford, that's just a funny place for a show to be popular. Although actually there is a storied tradition of British TV shows being popular in weird places.
Oh sure.
There's a British sitcom from the 80s and 90s called Only Fools and Horses, which I would actually recommend for any cultural
I'm sorry, what's it called?
Only Fools and Horses. It's Only Fools and Horses is known for having the funniest moment on British television where Del Boy falls through the bar.
Yeah, but it's not. That's not even the funniest bit in Only Fools and Horses.
No, it's not.
No, it's one of the dumber punchlines. Like it's fine. There are much funnier bits. There's a bit where they're trying to get it's a show about like 3 guys from South London who are like wheeler dealers. They're always trying to become millionaires, and it never works out for them. They're always like on in a scam. There's one time where they're trying to get a chandelier out of the ceiling, and they're like stood there and they're like poised with like a blanket underneath it to catch it. And Grandad, the idiot, is up there trying to like knock it through the ceiling. other side, and they're stood there with and then just like a chandelier just 30 feet down the corridor just falls out of the ceiling and just crashes into the... But the best one is when they're dressed as Batman and Robin and they're late for a fancy dress party and they're trying to get... And they're like running down the street, and then there's a woman being mugged. And then the mugger turns around to see them dressed as Batman and Robin running towards him, and just
so it's a lot of visual gags and stuff like that.
It's a very silly show, but it's again, it's like for a sitcom of that era, it's actually pretty good.
But that got popular.
It was massive in Albania.
Oh.
Yeah, they showed it in Albania, and then they remade it in Albanian with Albania, like a shot-for-shot remake.
Oh, amazing!
That's so interesting.
Yeah, bunker fools and horses. You know?
Yeah, and what's the fool to horse ratio? If you were to like, you know,
just like, we're not doing this today. We're not doing this today.
But this isn't about ek me. It's about ek was.
Fuck you. Let's go ahead and move on. To sort of like, talking a little bit about what happens in this episode of Darkplace, because we get a title card, which is also like, it's just like these little jokes, like the fact that the title card says Garth Marenghi and Dean Lerner presents, not presents. Like, that's a small joke that is very funny. And there's little things like that here and there that you're just going to spot, where it's like Dean needed to have his name on the thing, but Garth had initially had the idea to bill everything solo. And that's not how it ended up happening in the final cut.
It's just incredible to watch. There's like a title card here also for like a King Lear quote.
Yes.
That like opens it. Like it really dials you into exactly what kind of pretentious he is.
This cold night will turn us all to fools and madmen. King Lear, page 46.
Yeah. That is good.
We've got like a Twilight Zone style opening sequence where Garth is welcoming us to his dark place.
Yeah, and he's doing the typewriter thing of the like Stephen J. Cannell production logo and tosses the paper, and it, you know, you see it floating down to this great sort of Ed Wood model of a hospital with a single tree growing in front of it.
Yeah, this show I feel is so immersed in the history of television. Like there are so many like little references and flashes of like things that actually you don't need to understand the show. But if you are like a scholar of television from the 80s and 90s, there's a lot to pick up on.
And I mean, it feels like they actually are even using like old equipment to film it accurately in that style. It doesn't feel like sort of a later amalgamation. It feels very sincere and genuinely old in a way.
Yeah, it's got like film grain. It's got like wobbly analog sound. Yeah. I mean, you can hear even that monologue we just played. I mean, it sounds like it's being recorded on a laptop mic. Like
Yeah.
There's also, of course, I mean, Stephen King's Kingdom Hospital, of course, did not come out in time for this show, but Lars von Trier's The Kingdom did in the early 90s. Although that's a pretty well-respected show. It's certainly a very strange sort of Twin Peaks knockoff done by, you know, Danish perverts.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of Twin Peaks, like the soundtrack for this cribs a lot from Twin Peaks' design. It's just that I don't know how to describe it other than like an organ that's been like filtered through a MIDI filter. Like I don't, and these tunes are all, according to the show, based on a tune whistled by Garth Marenghi.
Yeah. Based on melodies whistled by Garth Marenghi, I think is what's in the,
there's a lot of synth, and this was the time where synth became so prominent throughout the 80s and 90s on TV and everywhere else, in part because of people like Angelo Badalamenti, but also because it was cheap. Instead of having to hire an orchestra, you could have one guy with a keyboard do all the parts of the orchestra. Andrew Hewitt was the composer for this show.
And it's very 70s synth. You can really you can really hear all of the wires being plugged in. You know, it's got the real telephone switchboard ass synthesizer.
Into Darkplace Hospital arrives Liz Asher, who is, again, played by Alice Lowe.
Well, she's played by Madeline Wool, who's played by Alice Lowe.
Exactly. And so Liz is, you know, she's the hot new doctor on the scene. She went to Harvard College, Yale, and is looking to start immediately.
When she aced every exam and got an A.
That's right.
Lest we forget.
But when she arrives, the first thing that she sees is a cat that encourages her to leave. But no, she does not heed the cat's warning.
And right from the start, like this show is like, this is what the show is going to be. You see the hands of a production assistant just put the cat down on the floor.
I love the way that this show so quickly sets the rules because you know exactly what you're getting into from the very beginning because it gives you so much trust and confidence, I think, in what they are going to do. If you're not on board after the first 3 minutes, you're not going to be on board. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And if you are, you super duper are.
It's also fun that within canon, that cat is dead.
Yes.
I don't even know how it could have possibly. It's not doing anything
Of all
death-defying.
the insane things that happen throughout this episode, you find out at the end, Dean Lerner says, oh yeah, that cat you saw in the first minute passed away somehow on this set.
She has, after meeting up with Matt Berry's doctor, whose name is
Rick Sanchez.
Dr. Lucien Sanchez.
I'm getting
Rick
confused with my
Sanchez.
fucking
I'm freaking Pickle Rick.
There we go.
I would accept,
A later
now that
interpolation.
a certain gentleman is no longer going to be voice acting on a number of cartoons, I would accept Matt Berry as Rick and or
absolutely.
Morty.
I'd love that.
We've got a problem, Morty.
Oh, Rick! Oh, gee!
We've got to go to another dimension, Morty.
Oh, geez, Rick, I don't know. There are so many dimensions as it is.
keep this bit
Supposed to
going.
be in school.
So, yes.
Does he voice both? Does he do both Rick and Morty?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
You got to get the same guy,
Because
right? That's
Justin
how it
Roiland
works.
did both of them before. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to stay that way. We have basically a vision that Liz has at this point. She has a vision that horrible things are going to happen. It's very scary. And we have a talking head segment where it's usually with Garth and Dean talking about how the show got made. And this is where we learn that Dean was very enamored with Garth Marenghi's writing. And that's basically what we're going to be seeing throughout is this back and forth.
Yeah, I mean that's the soul of the show. I think is the cutaways and they'll just cut away from the fucking craziest shit happening to explaining their rationale for doing this, and some of that I think is such a beautiful comic device because it just gives you can add so much more to because the stuff that's going on in the show within a show itself is funny enough, but then them justifying why they made this terrible TV show adds such a great other dimension to it.
Yes, exactly.
And with that total belief that what they have made was not only good, but historical.
Transcendent. Yes.
Yeah, this changed the game, and here's how we did it, folks. Here's the secret to the sauce.
Right.
Yeah, and this show could so easily just be a joke machine. You know what I mean? It could just do one mishap after another, and it would be great. It would still be a great comedy show. But what I think is so interesting is all the stuff that's, Garth Marenghi very famously says only cowards use subtext, but the show kind of thrives in subtext in a very interesting way. You learn so much about Garth Marenghi based on what he chooses to write about. And I think that every episode of this show focuses on a different fear, a fundamental primal fear that Garth Marenghi has about the world. And you learn so much about him, even though there was a point where I had this whole theory going that he was just a super conservative, anti-immigrant sort of monster, and then he'll come out and then just disprove that with he'll undercut it immediately in the talking head section, and so it really leads to this incredibly complicated character who could just so easily just be a joke.
Yeah, no, he's a fully fleshed out guy.
It's very much like when we were reading This Present Darkness and we got to the scene where we found out how scared Frank Peretti was of video arcades.
Yes.
And it's
Right.
the man himself just totally bleeds through, and you can see exactly who he is because he's opened up his own body and laid bare his internal self.
Yeah, or the way that Jerry Jenkins in Left Behind will describe the experience of being horny, It's just this is horrible. But
Yeah, you're in the video arcade, you're playing Time Crisis.
Exactly.
It's a private booth. No one's going to see.
There's a girl with big naturals steps in and picks up the second gun. Absolutely. Dean plays the most important character in the show other than Garth Marenghi's protagonist, Rick.
Yeah.
Right.
That Dean's character is Thornton Reed, who is, I guess, the administrator of the hospital, among other things.
Yeah.
He's
like
the chief of hospital.
Right.
the admin boss.
Yes.
Holder of
He
the
has to
purse
hit
strings.
the table when upset. Yeah.
Exactly. The way that Dean puts it is that, he brought like nothing but truth to the role. But when we hear him actually talk.
I hope he heeds my words about dealing with this in an orthodox manner.
He will. He's the best damn doctor on the wing, or any other wing for that matter.
He's a wild card.
But I'm glad he's in our deck.
Let's hope he plays a fair hand.
He'll come up trumps.
If it's not a joker in the pack.
And sometimes there is.
It's so complicated, the idea of being a bad actor, right?
Yes.
Playing
Yes.
bad acting. You have to find some specific thing that you're doing. And what Ayoade narrows down on is this guy is totally uncomfortable in front of a camera, but he has been gassed up so much that whatever he says is going to be natural and real by the mere virtue of just being a man who is alive.
Yes.
So all he's doing is the Atlantic School of Acting. He's just saying those lines. He's just going straight through like David Mamet.
Occasionally glancing into the camera. Like,
Yeah. Every once in a while, he has to do phone acting, which is maybe the best thing that Dean Lerner does, in my estimation.
Yes.
His
where
one-sided phone calls,
he puts the phone down too early and then picks it up again.
Yep.
He doesn't give
Goodbye.
any time for someone to talk back. And he's also like having to time certain hand actions. He realizes he needs to emphasize something like hitting the table, but he doesn't hit the table on the stressed verb. He says the whole sentence and then does this little knock.
because he can't do both at the same time. Whenever they talk about like really good singers are able to sing really poorly because they have, such a command of their instrument. Like that's what I get watching Richard Ayoade in this, is that he is such a brilliant comedic actor that he knows how to act badly without pointing at it. Like it just naturally feels like this is the best that this guy can do acting wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so interesting about what's going in the show. I mean, they talk about you need to know the rules before you can break the rules, but it's such a like studied. I mean, you see it a lot with like to do like comedy magic, you have to be really good at magic, and to do like comedy like music, like playing the piano badly, you have to actually be able to play the piano in order to like understand what would be funny about doing it badly. And I think this is such a great case study in it, where you got kind of like there are like the top line jokes, and then there are the pastiche jokes, and then there are the jokes which are jokes about jokes, where it's just like the sort of anti-humor of the show. And like that is a great, like just this list of cliches, just like he'll come up trumps unless there's a joker in the pack, and then this kind of like just overdoing it with the cliches, but then also then finishing it off with something that's not a cliche of just like, and sometimes there is.
Right.
Like this. It's flip-flopping back and forth.
It also raises a question, too, of like, well, was that originally in the script? Was that something that Dean wanted to add it in to more accurately reflect like his truth? You know, is that a Garth line? Is that a Dean line? Who knows?
Well, and like the actions too also have this feeling of being like Dean Lerner is on take 3 and he's like, oh, I know how to do this better. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to do this. And he does it so fast that the camera can't keep up. So the operator has to like very quickly pivot over to the right so that you can see his raised hand and then pivot back.
We have Rick, who is our hero, and he is, as we've heard, a bit of a maverick.
Yeah. Rick Douglas, MD, the best doctor around,
Yeah.
who loves to go into the pediatric ward and talk to a kid who's not a patient because his dad's the patient.
Correct.
He goes into this room that is a fully like decorated child's room and he's like, your dad's going to be okay.
It's so good.
Do my best. Yeah, there's also maybe this is something that wouldn't come across so much to the American audience. There's a lot of stuff in here which is like the joke is that the hospital is in Britain, but they're doing things Americanly for some reason.
Okay.
Like, so like the Harvard College Yale thing is a bit of a joke on that. But then also like Rick Douglas MD, like doctors here don't get called MD. It's not a thing. So it's like you would just be Dr. Rick Douglas, like that.
Gotcha.
Because in Britain you only get called doctor if you're a doctor or you have a you don't like dentists aren't doctors here and like psychiatrists aren't doctors, you know what I mean? It's just,
Sure.
yeah so there's that kind of, we don't have the MD distinction.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there's all these kind of like little details in it, which are kind of like, because I think there are a lot of shows that have been made in Britain which are like aping American stuff. So it's kind of slightly satirizing that tendency.
Yeah, I the thing that jumps out at me are the name tags that they all wear, where doctor is the largest thing on there, and then their names are very small underneath that. And I didn't know if that was if that's actually just what British doctor name tags look like, or if it was very specifically like a terribly designed prop.
Yeah, I don't, because I'm trying to think back in the day. Now in the NHS, they all wear big yellow name tags that have their name on them. Most of it is their name, and then it will say like doctor or whatever underneath. So it's kind of like the opposite of that. But I don't, I'm not sure what it would have been like back in the day, because that's kind of a recent thing.
Well, and I also think back to the point of pastiche, too. It's like, this is a soap opera hospital from an American soap, for the most part. That also happens to be...
this is St. Elsewhere, basically.
Yeah, and it also happens to be located above a hellmouth, as you do. As a result of the hellmouth, there's a lot of issues going on. One of the big problems is that there's a guy named Renwick who... I guess has been dealing with sort of alternate, the occult and things like that, because Garth Marenghi is constantly pushing it to the limit, right? This clip right here was the first clip that I ever saw of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, and this clip of Matt Berry's delivery alone sold me on this show.
So what happened between you and this Renwick customer?
It's just so good.
Then when we eventually do meet him as an actor, he sounds nothing like this.
Right. He's just doing what he thinks he needs to do in order to have gravitas.
And I think that's interesting too. Like the interviews that we have done, the commentaries on this show are just 3 people. It's just Garth, Dean Lerner, and Todd Rivers, played by Matt Berry. And Todd is a little bit more like Dean and Garth look like they were interviewed on the same day in the same building. And he might have been taken like on a different day somewhere else. And he speaks highly of his work and occasionally of the work of the TV show, but he's like a little bit more standoffish. He's a little bit further back. And you even get a joke in the last episode where they lost a reel of film and they've recreated it using the voices available at present, and he is not part of that scene. It's just Garth and Dean.
The takeaway that we're really getting here is, Todd, this was an early gig for him. He moved on to much bigger and better things. And, you know, this is a
he
footnote.
did what we do in the shadows.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the tensions between the cast and crew is quite an interesting, like, running thing through the show.
Due in no small part to the fact that the production standards killed a fair bit of the crew. That's part of it.
Yeah, imagine a cat dying your first day of work.
Yeah, that's
on
rough.
a new season of television. Like,
and you choose to go back.
But yes, Rick ends up telling us a little bit then about what happened to him and Renwick.
That night, we performed the rite and opened the gate. Halfway through, I went to the kitchen to fix us both a Coke float. But by the time I got back, he'd gone insane.
And he's like wobbling his head around. It's intercut.
Everywhere.
It's a very classic like horror bit of, you know, just the shaky head, the blurry shaky head. And that detail of Garth Marenghi just like, I went to make a Coke float, as though that's a normal thing that people do.
Yeah, the show is full of beautiful details like that.
Like, Garth Marenghi has a Coke float every single day and doesn't realize that that's a little unusual.
Like, we're in the middle of performing a satanic ritual, but you can't do that without a Coke float.
Of course.
It's very Australian.
I also
love a Coke float down there.
Also, just the
Right,
line.
in a fucking hellmouth, cunt. Fix yourself a Coke float first. Frozen Coke, love it. It's fucking hot out there.
Yeah.
It's hotter than fucking dog shit.
You know,
mate.
it's also very hot in hell, so you gotta have a Coke float there.
I'm madder than a tree full of glass, mate.
We all float here.
This is it.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
Once.
Listen, when I first joined this hospital, I was strictly solo. You were the first real buddy I ever had. But if you and he wish to be best buddies again, I won't stand in your way.
I've got the best buddy, Serge. But some shed sticks, no matter how hard you scrape. Hang back.
You got it.
It's even more obvious in just pure audio form. You can hear it flip between actual on-set audio and ADR. But they do this really this is more like a 70s thing. You know, you can watch you'll watch a movie and then all of a sudden everything will be just like right up here up close. You can hear his mouth sounds when he's like, you and he were buddies, weren't you?
Yeah.
And then it cuts back to Rick and he's like,
float just
there you go.
washing
and then
down.
it cuts back to Rick and he's like, yeah, we were buddies. And it's like you can tell immediately like night and day.
Right.
And I feel like, I'm sure there were some points where they did that intentionally, but I'm sure there might have just been some points where they were like probably a little lackadaisical about audio on set, because then they could just take advantage of that opportunity to do the worst
fun.
ADR on Earth. Yeah.
If you're working fast and loose, then those production techniques contribute to a show that just feels that way. But yes, I mean, Rick heads over to room 213. Larry fucking explodes. His head is just there like the android head in Alien. And so
he goes Alan Brazil mode.
Yeah. And
there is that moment after he explodes, and we get like 9 different camera angles of this explosion, right?
They
Just
spent a
over
lot
and
of
over
money
and
on this
over.
explosion. They did like high crank, multiple angles at once, and it is a massive explosion. The whole set is shaking, like shit's falling off the walls.
It's the biggest moment of the entire show, actually.
And the line that follows it is, "Are you all right?"
Yeah, for some reason, there's this very personal element to the idea of spontaneous human explosion for Garth Marenghi.
Yes.
And it was really important. It was a very somber day to shoot the explosion scene for him.
But he stayed strong for the sake of the crew. Dean.
Well, it's very 19th century. You know, spontaneous combustion. People were doing it back then.
Yeah.
And then it became less popular with the coming of the railroad.
It went out of fashion.
With, of course, the exception of Spinal Tap drummers. They kept doing it.
Yeah. Well, it was eventually replaced by the Flapper Girl.
Oh, is that right?
That was the trade-off. Yeah.
Well, there was no need to explode after that.
Sure.
And look at what happened to society after that. Are we better off? I don't think so.
Well, spontaneous human combustion was caused by a buildup of cum in the body. Which once the Flapper Girl had been invented, people were just cranking it.
Right.
But prior to that, you had less opportunity. You know, the bathing suits were down to the ankles.
Right.
It was tough.
Right.
Ejaculation was not invented till 1922.
That's right. Yeah.
So Rick fucking smacks the head across the room with a fucking shovel. I mean, it's
The
just
way
the
that
head
he's
is not
asking
dead.
to be euthanized.
Yes.
He's like, please
Yes.
kill me.
This man has
It really
fully
hurts.
exploded, and his still living head says, "You gotta do it, Doc.
Yeah,
I can't live with all this pain anymore."
He says, "I think I'm gonna
Really
die."
hurts.
But Rick realizes, he's still, possessed, so we need to burn the body. But the problem is that Reed, that's of course Dean's character, he's not down with that. That's a little too maverick to just burn somebody. You can't just burn somebody. And so they give him a proper Christian burial instead. And guess what? He comes back to life. Because
It's so funny the way in which there's so many just completely out of reality things in this show, but then something that's actually quite normal, like a cremation. They're like, you can't possibly do that.
Right.
Like every detail. The idea of euthanizing someone with a shovel, just like there's not a single scrap of this show where they haven't put a joke in. No matter what plot point it is they're trying to get over, there's not a single like nut or bolt of this show that isn't like there isn't some kind of subversion placed on it.
Because it's so much again to do with like the really weird way that Garth Marenghi sees the world. Like the thought of a cremation being a perfectly normal thing, that genuinely might not even cross his mind. Or it may. Like it's hard to say one way or the other. All we really know is that Garth Marenghi has this paralyzing fear himself of, I guess, demonic possession and also spontaneously exploding.
I think
also
death.
And a very deep-seated like religious fear of death as well. So all of this comes together in this funeral sequence then when Renfield comes back to life. And
Renwick
comes back to life. Thank you.
Nicholas Hoult bursts out of the grave.
Of course, the body arises from the grave fully intact, doing the blurry head, doing the fast head. We hate it when fast head happens, and then he has to get shot to death, and they expend so many bullets just killing this man. And Dean Lerner's, Richard Ayoade's physicality with that shotgun is one of my favorite things on all of planet Earth. It's what I aspire to be as a man, as an actor, as a human being, as a child of God.
Just rigid. Just unflinching, popping off those shotgun shells.
Just
it's
like
a
an
truly beautiful
animatronic.
performance.
Just
completely
ticking back and
emotionless.
forth.
Yeah.
But also aiming way too high.
Wait till he's just shooting up in the air.
Yeah,
Probably because I think in the logic of the show, that's a real shotgun that he is just shooting live bullets.
Right, so you
in
can't
the
just
sky.
shoot straight ahead. You have
Correct.
to, yeah.
You have to angle it up. Yeah.
Otherwise,
You
you
can't
end
hit
up
the
with
fake gravestones that they've put in this, like, I guess, alleyway. I don't know. It's really lovely, the set design here. But yeah, Garth Marenghi Rick Douglas just fully shoots the mother of the dead guy.
And what's most important to Garth at the end of this episode, and at the end of every episode, is not only that you realize that Douglas is a hero, but that Garth himself is a hero by being Douglas.
Right.
That he actually is doing
those
these
two are
good
one
and
and the
great
same
things.
Yeah. The second episode, it just starts out with Garth Marenghi reading the book again, except rather than blood, it's maggots this time.
And it's much more explicitly just the word maggots like 6 times in a row.
The chef in the hospital kitchen is cooking up chicken. The chicken is not ready.
The chef played by Stephen Merchant.
And we've got the clip, and it's wonderful.
Where's this flipping chicken?
Who said that?
And he crosses over and ducks under a doorway because
Was it
he's
you,
Steve
Steve?
Merchant and he's
Your
very
pretty little
tall.
face. I said 5
He's the
minutes.
tallest man in Britain.
But nothing. Women like you are the reason this chicken's late in the first place. You'll be lucky if you get any of my lovely chicken if you keep up this kind of behaviour.
And we've established in the first episode that Dr. Liz Asher is psychic in multiple different ways.
Right.
She is many
Telekinetically
kinds
inclined.
of psychic.
Yeah.
Because she can have visions, she can read minds, she can move stuff with her mind. And, well, what happens when a woman has a whole lot of power?
Right.
Turns out things
goes
get
Imelda
pretty
Marcos.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Garth's next big fear, right? Women.
Yes.
Right.
Just
right.
women.
Margaret
And-
Thatcher.
Just a great physical performance in this episode from Alice Lowe, who has to slowly just unhinge and become this like Carrie-esque figure of just destruction because she starts telekinetically throwing around utensils and pretty much anything that's not bolted to the ground and killing people.
Yeah. This is we also find that another fear that Garth Marenghi has is like actual ESP and people being able to use psychic possibilities. So he's created a charity to unlock psychic potential in underprivileged children.
Yep.
Just curious to hear your thoughts broadly on that, Milo, you know, the feasibility of that, whether you approve or disapprove.
Look, we need to get kids off the streets and using telekinesis.
Yeah, yeah.
In my view.
Yeah.
I've got 2 words for you. Telekinesis.
As many kids as possible into Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youth. And this feels like a very direct reference to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who spent much of his life trying to prove the existence of fairies, you know, and psychics and media and all that sort of thing. One of the most credulous fucking morons on the planet Earth who thought he was a genius because he made Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes was so smart.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
in the
and
same
then,
way,
like-
Garth Marenghi created Rick Douglas, so he must also be the super smart hospital genius.
Of course.
It makes sense.
It does.
There is nothing more unsettling than Ayoade's not laugh that he does.
Yeah.
Where he emotionlessly just makes the sounds of laughter and the camera just lingers on him for just a little too long. It is so sinister and so delightful every time it happens. And it happens a lot because there are jokes written into the show that Garth Marenghi has written.
Yes.
That he makes everyone pause to scream laugh at. And these sequences go on for a very unsettling amount of time.
literal like minute at one point.
And they're
I think they keep
almost
laughing
always just at Liz Asher's expense. They're always just jokes about women. And the entire premise of this episode is that, women are scary in general, but also like women having powers is dangerous because of PMS.
Right. Yeah,
that is the entire plot of this episode. And Garth Marenghi thinks it's so important to like warn everyone else about PMS because of what what he thinks it's done to him personally.
This is the episode where we get the amazing bit where Liz is quite calmly explaining the situation, and one of the other cast just slaps her around the face, and she goes, "Thank you, I was being hysterical."
There's also something too, I think, that is actually a very interesting commentary on people with megalomania, right? And particularly because it usually is these older white dudes who tend to have like the confidence of somebody with actual talent, and that there's sort of a misogyny built into that worldview because the egotistical side of them is just like, well, I'm the best there is, and I'm a man, therefore men are inherently superior to women because I am that thing. And this is sort of the episode where it is at its most blatant because, they got to take her down. They got to take down Liz Asher by going through the catacombs of Darkplace, which has a lot of tunnels that are really long and curvy.
Yeah, it's very... The way they shoot the sequence is very Star Trek Voyager, actually.
Interesting.
If you've ever watched Voyager, there are so many fucking scenes in the Jeffries tubes in Voyager that look just like this.
I don't like the name Jeffries tubes.
Well, then you don't like Star Trek.
We're not going to be friendly to this, AJ. You either you got to put up with the Jeffries tubes. I don't give a shit whether you like them or not. They are essential to the function of Starfleet ships.
That's right.
Sure.
Fucker.
I'm Jeffrey Stoobs, and I'm running for Congress in Indiana's 4th district.
This sequence goes on way too long, which is the point.
And it's all in slow motion because they just didn't have enough pages of script, and they realized that they were going to have to overcrank everything to fill time.
Per Dean, the episodes were running up to 8 minutes under.
It's like any scene without dialogue was considered for slow mo.
Right.
Yeah. So like also the premise here is that we are actually not even seeing the full episodes. We are seeing them cut down to make room for the interviews, and there were even more slow motion sequences. But for the most part, we're seeing Rick Douglas and a bunch of, helpless red shirt doctors run through this gauntlet of Plan 9 from outer space objects hanging off of strings.
Well, and then they encounter Liz, and she's up in the fucking corner, like in Hereditary. And I gotta say, this is...
It's referencing media that hasn't even been made
it's amazing.
Yet. It's incredible. Prescient.
Although I will say, this is actually, like, it's very funny, but it's also just a little bit scary, I think.
Yeah.
Like, it
it's
does...
like an idea that could work in different hands. Like, it's almost there at like the level of competence when you're just looking at shots of her, and then they like speed it up, and they, everything else kind of ruins it.
Over and
Josh
over again.
is immersed in the Marenghi world here. He's like, you know what? Women are kind of scary when they get that period, actually.
Matthew Holness has a really wonderful quote from that Guardian article that I'd like to read now. But
sure.
Most of the stuff I'm writing now is serious horror because he's transitioned his career to being actually doing legitimate horror now.
Although he has started writing his Garth Marenghi again as well, interestingly.
Yeah, doing novels,
but he says, but the things you find funny are potentially related to the things you find frightening. And I think when you watch this show, you really get a sense that this is a guy who understands what scary things are in the same way that like Ayoade understands what makes a good acting performance, but is able to turn it comedic because he has such a brilliant understanding of the craft. And so, when she's like twisting, like there are a couple sequences in this that I'm like, oh, this actually could be very frightening throughout the entire series, but none more so than I think that her like just turning back and forth, like very uncannily in the roof there. Yeah. With her hair all sticking up. It's terrifying. And there's
I disagree. I don't think it's terrifying.
It could be, though. It could be. And Hereditary is the proof of that because they did the same shot.
Right. But I'm a little baby wimp. So that's the other thing. In fact, just now as we were recording, my partner walked in the kitchen and I did not hear them. And when I turned to look, I had a brief moment where I almost shit my pants.
I scared someone so horribly last night at the escape room. And it wasn't even for a scary... I mean, we don't really do scary parts except for one version of the show. And this was not that version. But it's just like the lights were coming back on and I was walking back on to do my scene and I started talking and I just went, ah! And this lady screamed because she was facing away from me and didn't realize I had come in.
Do you scare easily, Milo? Are you into like horror, that kind of thing at all, or what's your relationship with the genre?
I'm neither into nor not into horror.
Okay.
I have seen, so I've seen Hereditary, for example.
Sure.
The Hereditary is an interesting one because I feel like the first like hour or hour and a half, very little happens, and then the second hour and a half is like
too much happens.
Just constant jump scares one after another. I remember me and my girlfriend at the time were watching it upstairs at my parents' house. And then, like, at a certain point, we were yelping so often that they came up to check on us. But, like, not even in a, like, particularly scared way. Just constantly just going, ah!
Yeah.
Like, it's just every 30 seconds, there's just a new thing flies at the screen or whatever. I caught myself actually doing it on a plane recently. I was watching a movie, like a thriller movie on a plane, and it just had a few, like, jump scares in it. And you're, like, kind of like people are, like, sleeping next to you. I was on, like, a long-haul flight from, Dubai to London, and I just catch myself in the seat kind of going like that. And you become like so embarrassed. like what was that? It must have been the guy behind. I don't know. Yeah.
I'd like to also take a moment just to shout out because we haven't talked about costume design in this in this yet, and I think this episode really personifies what they do really well about it. Encapsulates what they do really well about it. There's a point where they're just interviewing people to see who's behind all the telekinetic things. And they walk up and he's like, are you behind it? He's like, no. It's like, okay, you're good to go then. And they're all supposed to be wearing like hospital robes, but they just couldn't afford hospital robes. So they're wearing like kimonos and PJs and like just robe adjacent costume pieces. There's one guy who is like the extra in it who just gets thrown into like different like basically community theater costumes and told to like walk across the background. You can spot him a couple times.
Really nailed the aesthetic of like, we need to make something that looks shitty and cheap that still remains functional and tells a story about who these characters are. And also like how they would have put this thing together as well. We see this in the set design too. Yeah. We didn't even talk about Garth Marenghi's car. Rick's car, which is just such a fucking brilliant piece of set design.
Garth Marenghi's idea of Rick Douglas and of the other doctors is that they're cops. They are X-Files detectives. They are doctor cops. And so the costuming has to like illustrate that for our main characters, that they are somehow both things by letting the costumes drape in sort of a similar fashion and layer in a similar way.
Yeah, sorry, we were just looking up Garth Marenghi's car.
Yeah, just like looking at pictures of the car on Google Images.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sci-fi golf cart.
Yeah, they took a golf cart. But what's so funny too is like you are expected to believe that it is a real car. They treat it as if it is a real car, and it is very clearly not a real car.
It's like one step removed from wearing a cardboard box around your waist and like drawing wheels on it. And the production design of the driving scenes especially is beyond the car, which there is nothing beyond the car. It's just an immediate black backdrop.
Right.
It looks like my recording setup right now, right? It's just like a sound blanket on either side of the car. And the camera is constantly exposing that, right? They have lights that are kind of hitting the wall so that you can see the curtains. There's really no attempt at even creating an illusion there.
The way that this episode wraps up is that there's this one character who's a temp, I guess,
who can never be fully in the shot. He's always just
they
right
fuck
on
up
the bottom
framing
of the shot
every single time. This is such a dumb thing that says so much about who Garth Marenghi is and also who this type of guy is, that when this temp, this character who's a one-off, dies, the last thing they talk about is the legal status of the Principality of Bermuda.
What's your name, son?
Clive.
It's a strange name for an American.
I'm from Bermuda.
Oh, that explains it. British Principality.
It's actually a dependent territory.
What's that?
The Queen appoints a governor charged with internal security and external defense, but she's still the de facto sovereign.
We had so much to teach each other.
That's also just such a sharp observation about that kind of writing, though.
Exactly.
Like, these kind of writers are obsessed that you know all the facts, or like that they know facts, that they know
very
all
Dan
of
Brown.
these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like stop the momentum of the narrative completely cold to show you, yes, here's some additional information. Look at how smart I am in this moment as a writer for being able to teach you about these things.
Well, and there's also like it's like, oh, we've given you a complex character. Sure, he has an American accent, but he's kind of not really American, you know?
Right.
He thinks that this is also revealing to us something about this person as a human being. Right?
I think
the
it was
the legal
cowardice.
status of Bermuda.
It was cowardice on the part of the costume department not to put him in Bermudan business dress. You know, like the knee length pastel shorts
Bermuda
with
shorts.
the shirt and tie on, and the high socks and Oxford shoes.
For sure.
I think that's
mean, you
what he
don't really
should've
see
been
a lot
wearing.
of his costuming because it's just his floating head in space.
I feel like
for so much of it.
I feel like that's like that was the impression that I got from the way that they shot him most of the time. Is like, oh, maybe they didn't have all the costume pieces, or most of his scenes were shot separately from everyone else because like no one else is in frame most of the time. And he has like 6 feet of headroom.
So the episode ends with Liz getting an off-camera lobotomy. There's also this horrible joke that's like she offers them buns and she bends over and you've got Matt Berry being buns. I see a couple I fancy, and it's like, what is that? Like, what are we doing here? And that's the one where they laugh for like a minute.
I like your impression of Matt Berry as a Southern gentleman.
Yeah, I don't know. Leave me
I think
alone.
he
North
sounded
Carolina
a bit
plantation
like
owner.
RAF officer in the 1940s. Bands.
I'll see some buns that I fancy.
Look, just because the rest of you are all better at voices than me doesn't mean you need to rub it in my face, okay? Okay?
It's all right, good buddy. We're going to go bomb those dirty Germans any day now.
But yeah, I mean, it's...
Now, what happened between you and these crowds? What on earth is the Luftwaffe?
Garth thinks that the message of this episode is that the human spirit cannot be overcome. That is not the message of this episode.
Nope. No. The message of this episode is keep Garth Marenghi from all women at all times.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think that has been succeeded in doing. I think that's that's been done.
When we get back, we're going to keep talking about Darkplace. We're going to recap the rest of the episodes. We're going to encounter Scotland and some apes and a whole bunch of other good stuff. So, stay tuned for that.
Oh, hi. Hello, listeners. It is I, Hubert Magnus Fringe, owner and operator of Edinburgh Fringe, the festival that answers the question, if a stand-up bombs in an empty room, do they make a sound? My dear bairns, do you have an hour-long show of knee-slapping yuck-yucks? Do you have an evening of sketches you're hoping would make a good TV show? Do you have a childhood trauma that you'd love to yell at strangers about for an hour and a half? Then submit yourself for consideration and then immediately be approved for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Put up your show in one of our many varied and colourful venues, like the gutted out basement of a butcher shop haunted by the ghosts of at least 4 shepherds named Gregor, or the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre, dedicated to a man who, and this is true, when once asked if he believed in fairies, clapped his hands so hard that wee Tinkerbell exploded. Would you like to see Scotland in August? Too bad, because you'll be spending most of your time outdoors on our cobblestone streets, desperately throwing flyers into the hands of tourists to fill a 99-seat theatre that will later be occupied by an Albanian circus troupe. And a horrifically overconfident NYU theatre company called Arto was right, doing a show where they just scream into buckets for 45 minutes. Trust me, I've been there. I did a show here once. I stood out on the street corner, the rain beating down on me, my very own flyers disintegrating, the ink running down my hand, as I begged someone, anyone, to come see my wee show. Some folks took flyers, but for the most part they passed me by, like I was not but a lonely ghost, haunting the streets of Edinburgh. Soon it came time to do the play, a solo show that combines Oedipus Rex with this one time I went with me dad to a water park in Carbridge. So I dried myself off and made my way down to that butcher's basement. Nobody showed up, and I thought, what's the point? Why do this at all? And that's when I noticed the ghosts of the 4 shepherds, all named Gregor, staring at me, watching me, waiting. So, I began to perform, all 90 minutes of it, and at the end the ghosts sat unblinking. I screamed at them, "What do you want? What do you want from me?" And their leader, their Gregorius Gregor, leaned in close, blood pouring out of his ears, and whispered, "Would you like to come see our show at 5 p.m? So come to the festival where we promise great art and that you'll never, ever, ever recoup your run costs. Edinburgh Fringe, we put the I in futile.
Broadway is back. We're back. And the next episode of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace we are going to talk about is based on a true life story from the life of Garth Marenghi, apparently. When we were talking about like these episodes, I remember, Milo, you specifically said this one, the one with the eyeball child, was the one that you would most often skip in rewatchings because this one was just a little bit weird.
Same.
Yeah, it is odd. The bit where he's being fucked by the eyeball child. It is a strange.
It opened. I mean, it's basically like we're in minute 1, and then all of a sudden, a guy's getting fucked by
a
his
floating
name
eyeball
from Monster Rancher. It's absurd.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, look, there is precedent for this in Stephen King's writing, right? Like in Dreamcatcher, the way that the aliens get up inside your body is through your asshole. And the reason I know this is because it's my mom's favorite Stephen King book.
No,
because she thinks
it's no one's favorite Stephen King book.
She thinks it's so funny that the aliens would go up through their assholes.
Well, your mom needs to see Bubba Hotep as well then.
Yeah, I what?
It's about a mummy that sucks your soul out through your asshole.
Oh, nice.
Is that true?
Yes. And it goes to a nursing home in East Texas that Elvis Presley and Black John F. Kennedy are in.
So yeah, there's precedent for this in Stephen King's work before, but like it feels very jarring in this one.
It's something. I mean, yeah, because what we learn is that this, as with everything else, is, to do with one of Garth's neuroses. This, I guess, is one about his testicles. Like, he's just got concerns about his dick and balls. And so that's all to do then with the way that this eyeball monster got rendered.
Who doesn't, honestly?
Well, yeah, of course.
This one has, I think, a little bit less of an anchoring than other episodes because you can usually find something just like upsetting about Garth, something that you can morally frame yourself as a human being against as like the impetus for the horror thing. And here it's more just silly. It's just kind of purely silly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's fun in a way too, because what ends up happening is that the guy gives birth sort of. It's kind of like the alien in Alien, where it's like it bursts out of him or whatever, and it's a gigantic eyeball baby, which is known as Skipper the Eye Child, and
yes.
He worked his way into your heart, right? Didn't you feel just deep love, Milo, for Skipper the Eye Child?
Do the Russians love their eye children too? I mean,
go on.
Yeah, there's a certain. Skipper the Eye Child, he certainly sticks with you.
Yes.
As a concept.
Yes.
We all have to consider, if ever we do have children, how we would react if our respective other halves did give birth to some kind of eye child.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's, every man must answer that question for himself, truly.
Right.
Yeah.
So thinking about it for yourself, how would you answer that? The eye child.
I'd kill it with hammers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. Which is, spoiler alert,
Rick
kind of happens at the end.
Yeah, Rick Douglas does not want to kill Skipper the Eye Child with hammers.
But everybody else wants him to.
He had a son who died. Everyone he knows, everyone he ever loved has died, and he's said as much in the beginning of the show. But he had a son who was part grasshopper. And the grasshopper child died because he jumped really high into helicopter blades.
But his wife is also a normal human wife. Like, was he cucked by a grasshopper? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
He must have been, though. Like, he must have been, right? Like, unless grasshopper is like a syndrome over there.
Well, I think,
like
again,
you just are a grasshopper sometimes.
It must be another one of those things that's to do with Marenghi's specific neuroses. Like, this is coming out in a very like dream-like Freudian way, right?
Yeah.
Where like there's questions about sort of phallic imagery and children and reproduction and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And these are Garth's deepest, darkest fears that are bearing themselves out here.
The parts that are funniest to me in this episode are the parts where they keep litigating the fact that they weren't allowed to show a giant erect alien penis on TV. And they are so upset, so angry, so righteous about it.
Well, the thing is, an alien penis is not technically nudity. Like that only applies to human nudity. So, I think they've misread the law.
Well, and Dean Lerner says, like the erection, erections happen. He could have an erection right now.
He doesn't.
I haven't.
But he could. But he could. There are some really fun technical things they do in this episode that I think are very, very silly. That the fact that the lockers aren't real lockers, they're just like, I guess, a giant metal thing with like paper paste on the front of them. It's a very good detail because lockers are incredibly difficult to source. Like, I think that's a very cool like inside baseball joke. But also every time when Garth looks out a window with blinds in it, there aren't blinds on the reverse shot.
Oh, that's funny.
And it took me a little while to catch on that they were taking the blinds on and off this fucking window. We also learned that Rick Douglas is a Vietnam War vet.
Yes.
I guess.
I think it's another one of these like jokingly putting American references in because obviously Britain did not.
Right.
Unusually for
Right,
Britain.
right,
It
right.
chose to not enter the Vietnam War. The Australians, they went in there.
Okay.
They went for it, but we didn't. So,
Sure.
it's like that kind of, again, like pastiching, like most of these TV shows would have been Americans. They would have had these kind of details. And
Right.
then, like,
Well,
subverting
to be fair to Australia, they were told that there were Coke floats in Vietnam. So,
Well, right.
they had no choice.
Well, you need a Coke float in Vietnam. It's hot, man. It's so... oh, mate. It's fucking roasting out here. I could go for a Coke float, right, and it'd ban me.
I took the note that it's so nice that Dean Lerner is getting better at acting.
Yeah.
Like, this was still the point in the show where I was rooting for his character to like get better. But like, say what you will about him, the man can deliver exposition. Like he's memorized those lines.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't call him Dean Lerner for nothing.
Yeah.
Dean Lerner does everything word perfect. And there is something to... There is a serialized aspect to this show's 6 episodes, and you can see the show get slightly better by the end. Like there are better techniques and better camera angles and better performances in a way that's like genuinely kind of exciting.
The other thing about this episode that I just wanted to point out, Graham Linehan shows up. And boy, was it weird to see him again.
Yeah, he's very funny. He's a very funny guy.
Well, this is the thing.
Not
right?
at all insane.
For British people, I mean, for years, Graham Linehan was just a sort of like lovable comedy writer guy. He was
a scam. Yeah.
It's only in the last few years where he went completely insane. I mean, prior to that, there was no indication that he was a weird guy.
Right. Just this is talk about like life imitating art or whatever, where like Darkplace is a show about a very weird guy who is done in by his own neuroses. And that also has now ended up happening with Graham himself. I mean, I don't know what the fuck has happened to him, but it's like even you look at him physically and he looks so much weirder now than he did back then. Like it's like the transphobia is like a virus that has also had physical deleterious effects on his own body or something.
I love that like J.K. Rowling does the most like face-tuned Callista Gingrich ass pictures of herself, like for her profile pictures, and then you see her in real life, and it's like, wow, she doesn't look like that anymore. Like time has passed.
Callista Gingrich, the most problematic hear me out of all.
Oh God. No, come on now.
No.
I love saying that to get a reaction. It's so fun.
Because I mean, I understand getting to her if you want to just get to Newt.
There we go. That's you're hearing me out
that
as
makes
Newt.
sense. Yeah. Newt. Yeah. Newt is not a hear me out. Come on. Who wouldn't? Famously, that man has dipped that dick in so many holes.
He's like Boris Johnson. Like he's not outwardly attractive, but he has a vibe. You know, women find him irresistible.
You know
once
that man
they meet
is
him.
that man is just fucking dropping dick off on the reg.
Getting that Newt Gingrich. Getting all up in that Gingrich.
What are the reports of Boris Johnson's sex life that are out
wild?
there?
Oh, he has so many children. He has more children than Nick Cannon.
He's a big shagger and always has been. I don't know. There's something about Boris Johnson. You know, a certain kind of women they can't resist the bojo, the big man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's his hair. It's just so immaculate.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a man like this going down in pussy? It's bloody good stuff. You know, it's quite absolutely spiffing. You know, incredible. With laugh.
But it was interesting too, where like Linehan sort of was positioning himself in the same way that everyone was around Brexit and Trump getting elected and everything, as like an advocate. You know, he put it in his bio that he's an immigrant, and he would always sort of champion these like liberal causes. And it was in the same way that Rowling was doing at this time too. And then on that path, just realized that there was nothing left in his life for him but to hate trans people more than anything on earth.
Yeah.
Nothing mattered anymore. His own writing, his legacy, his Father Ted musical, his marriage, his family, it was all like totally consumed by, like you said, this thing that he turned into a personal neurosis.
It is the madness rune of political tendencies. It's the one that sends people the most mad. But I think it's because it is a liberal thing, and I think that most of the people it's not something that the right overall are particularly interested in, because it's such a like they're much bigger picture. Like transphobia is too specific for the right, because they don't want women to have rights either. So whether or not some people want to be women or whatever, that's not really interesting to them. They're like, fine, we're not giving women rights anyway, so that's not a problem for us, whether some other people want to get in on women's rights. And so it is this weird sliver of people who are kind of prone to transphobia, where it's kind of like particularly in like the UK, it's like you're kind of like old school feminist talking heads.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
it's interesting because it's such a split from the US.
Right.
Because the US, it's firmly in the Republican project. And now we have, fucking dipshit columnists trying to make it a liberal thing.
There's
as
a
well,
handful of shitty Democrats, but like it is firmly on the conservative side of things in the US.
Whereas the conservatives in the UK are very, on the whole, there's quite a strong liberal tradition. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are certainly transphobes in the Conservative Party, and it's definitely like making its way into Conservative policy, but you quite often meet surprising allies on even the right of the Conservative Party, just because they are like diehard liberals. They're like, hey, you want to wear a dress? That's no business of mine. As long as taxes are
like
low.
Libertarian, you mean? Personal libertarian, socially.
Yeah. And so you do get like occasionally you'll find yourself, fighting on the same side as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and it is whiplash, but and it tends to be like there's more of a problem, I think, with like transphobia particularly being a bugbear in the Labour Party at the moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, this is off topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's off topic in a way, but
it's pertinent to this episode because seeing Graham like appear is kind of a interesting jump scare.
I was going to say the same thing. It's kind of a jump scare. It's like, what? Whoa.
He gets the job done. He's nothing. He's
not the most memorable. He's no Stephen Merchant, but
No. This episode is basically there's a big shootout at the end, but I mean we can kind of yada our way through.
The eye child bites down on Garth's hand and he brutally murders it by like repeatedly slamming it into a wall in a sink and all that shit. It's great. Next episode is The Apes of Wrath. This is the episode.
Mighty Boosh is here.
Yeah,
this is another sort of purely silly one.
Yes,
we have people drinking contaminated water. Very obviously, this also kind of feels like watching an 80s or 90s Star Trek episode.
Yeah, they're drinking like Mountain Dew.
Yeah. Glowing phosphorescent green water. Yeah, this results in Sanchez turning into an ape, as well as Liz. But yeah, they've got to figure out how to cure the ape disease.
Also, I mean, there are a couple of things I think for the grander like meta narrative that are good to find out in this episode. One of them is that Dean Lerner punched a kid while on set because the kid talked bad about his Garth's
an
writing.
Identical scene to that previous like pediatric wing scene. Except the kid is actually sick this time. And it's a scene that is, again, Garth Marenghi showing how great Rick Douglas is in a way to say, look at how great I, Garth Marenghi, am. Yes. And then it immediately cuts away to Dean Lerner saying that he assaulted this child on set.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
There we go.
Okay? What I was asking in that scene is, what if politicians continue to pay doctors peanuts? Could they literally turn into monkeys? And no one's asked that before.
Garth Marenghi is a staunch defender of the NHS.
Yeah.
And you know what? Good for him.
Comrade Marenghi over here. Solidarity forever.
Well, and this comes back to a question too, and we sort of have been talking about this a bit. Like, do you think that Garth Marenghi's character is supposed to be any sort of like is supposed to be making any kind of a real political statement, or do you think it's just like it's funny to have a little grab bag of ideas for the sake of the joke? Are they trying to make a bigger point here about politics, or not really?
I think you have to see it as a cultural criticism product and not a political one. I think, but and also because it was in that period in Britain where like the politics wasn't very. I don't know. The politics wasn't interesting then.
Right.
Was it Blair? Was Blair still?
This is New Labour.
Yeah. I mean, Blair was in till 2007 and Labour were in until 2010.
Right.
So yeah, 2003, 2004 is kind of like the... I mean, on the left, you wouldn't necessarily say everything was fine in Britain, but everything was a lot more okay than it is now. There was a lot less political unrest and tension in the country as a whole.
Is there anything particular with this ape shit, or is it again just like a motif that's kind of funny and we can make Planet of the Apes references?
I think it's just weird, and I think that it's the show is so surrealist throughout, and that's kind of so much of the stuff that comes up. You're just like, what?
Yeah.
And I think also it's Garth trying to draw attention to how clever he is because he's always coming up with the scenario whereby Rick Douglas doesn't drink water.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like, I'm about to drink water. Oh, that's someone else's water. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Ooh, I'm not going to touch the water. No, not this time. And he's going through this thinking, I'm brilliant. People don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'm nailing this right now.
Right. Milo, I had a question about Matthew Holness's sort of like image in the UK outside of Garth Marenghi. Like, is he somebody who tours a lot for like stand-up comedy? Like, what is his placement in sort of comedy in the UK?
Little is known about Matthew Holness. I mean, it's sort of semi-joking, but like, I mean, other than this, and he's had bit parts in a few other things, he's just not someone you come across very often.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he's pretty reclusive.
He's not super high profile.
Yeah, because like Richard Ayoade, he's going on all the panel shows all the time. He does Big Fat Quiz of the Year and all that.
Yeah, I mean, even he these days is much less. But I mean, he was in more stuff. I mean, he was in the IT crowd after this, another Linehan production, which was very, very popular. And then he's moved into kind of film and stuff. But even actually, Ayoade these days is less in the public eye than he used to be. He did a travel show for a bit. I'm not sure if that's still on. But there's a tradition of that in British comedy, like guys who make a great comedy thing and then they just kind of like disappear or live on the fringes.
Only that could have been Ricky Gervais.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, if only Gervais had followed suit.
Well, there's a great British comedian, Pierre Novelli, who I can't remember if this was a bit on stage. I think it was just something he said on a podcast I was on with him once, where he was just like, the thing is that comedians who are raised on the thin gruel of British public approval, if they go to America and they start consuming the heady broth of American audiences, it just turns them insane. Like, it
happened to James Corden.
It happened to Gervais. It happened to Corden. They just go over there and people just tell them they're great for ages because that's particularly on the West Coast. Like, I found I did some comedy shows on the West Coast ages ago, and like the extent to which like people are just
those guys will gas you up. Yeah,
because I was watching.
They're just so stoked that you're killing it.
Well, being backstage at a gig and watching someone go up with like no material who sucks and crush.
Yeah.
Now in the UK, that's a very bad sign. That means the room is bad. The people in the room have no taste. They're laughing at dog shit. You're probably not going to do well. But in like fucking California, you just do even better. They're just like, we thought that guy was good. This guy's also like, and it's just like, it's like moon gravity for comedy. Like I've never seen anything like it.
And that is a very California thing. I mean, you try to go up and pull that off in Chicago or New York, you're not going to have that experience.
Yeah, different energy for sure. Yeah.
Well, speaking of people who do not shy away from the limelight, Noah Fielding plays the big bad of the episode.
Oh my God!
Yeah, they put Noel in a full monkey suit.
Did I say Noah? I'm so sorry.
You did say Noah.
Noel Fielding, yes.
Noel Fielding.
And he's populated his arc with just two of every kind of ape. Yeah, it's just all
there.
It's all apes. It's like a yacht club, really. It's like a yacht club of apes.
Would you say that all of his apes have returned in this situation?
Yeah, they would be pretty. They'd be pretty bored all on that.
Yeah. Oh my God, they have slurp juice. The apes have slurp juice in this episode.
That's confirmed. That's confirmed.
Yeah.
It's green.
And
yeah.
here's the thing. Y'all still don't realize this. You can use multiple slurp juices on a single ape.
I know.
Okay, I just get it through your fucking head already.
Is that tweet precipitated the crypto crash? Yes. So fine. Literally, the multiple slurp juice on a single ape, that was a Twitter meme for 24 hours, and then the bottom fell out of the entire thing. It was as though that tweet suddenly was like the trigger phrase that snapped everyone in the financial markets out of their madness, and they were like, fuck, we've all paid millions of dollars for pictures of apes. We need to offload all of this shit onto idiots as quickly as possible.
I remember too that
That's actually what happened in 1929 as well.
I went on Trashfuture
After the invention of flappers.
last year, almost exactly to a year ago, because I distinctly remember that slurp juice jokes were the thing that everybody was doing in that exact moment. We talked about Pope NFTs. I remember this distinctly.
And I think it was really important that guy paid for Dana Snyder to read it on Cameo.
Yes,
like
definitely,
I think that's a huge part of this. Otherwise, we could still be in this.
There's a point in this episode that they just green screen a bicycle chase.
I do love the part of the chase where he's just running through the exact same 2 rows of boxes over and over again, and they start putting up mirrors to make it look like there are other hallways.
Yes.
But this one keeps going.
Yeah.
It's really a lot.
It's that line
full
of like,
obstacle course. I mean, it does have a sort of rake effect, right?
Yes,
Where
yes,
like
it
you're
comes
like,
back around.
okay,
Yeah,
sure, yeah, I'm back on the Bored Ape yacht.
But the biggest development we get here is at the end, which is that Madeline is actually presumed dead. The actor who plays Liz is actually just dead.
This whole time she hadn't been in any of the interviews, and sure enough, she was probably murdered
by Dean Lerner. He
Most
absolutely
likely,
killed her and buried her in the Eastern Bloc.
After this, we move on to our 5th episode. We learn a lot about anti-Scottish bigotry or anti-Scotch bigotry.
About bigotry in general, really. This is about a larger issue about any kind of prejudice. Because, I could be prejudiced against you, Josh. Not even for being Dutch, just for being you, And I think there's a lot that we can learn. Bigotry can go in all kinds of directions.
Absolutely.
This was the first episode of Darkplace that I ever saw.
Oh,
and
wow.
Remains my favorite episode.
This is beautiful.
Actually.
This is I think the most Brit vibes.
Definitely.
Yeah. It is a masterwork. And they do sacrifice, they make these very conscious sacrifices because this is actually the best shot episode. Like there aren't a lot of like really stupid shots, so they kind of get rid of some of the jokes about the incompetence of the production just to lean into the premise. They're like, this premise is so good, we're gonna deliver it as straight as this show can do it.
Yes,
because it's just so bewilderingly horrible and funny.
And so what happens at the beginning of this episode is that there is a very randy nurse who is looking to get lucky outside on the moors.
We have a doctor and a nurse who are fucking behind a curtain, and they, throughout their entire time alive in this episode, are fully dubbed by other actors.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It's Matt Berry and Alice Lowe just doing these 2 completely different actors' voices.
Well, the thing about Darkplace is that it was a real turning point for me as a writer, because up until that point I've been writing balls-to-the-wall horror. For this, I wanted them to kind of go, ooh. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the programme, is that it managed to bridge that gap between and ooh.
Great delivery there. I love that line. So the ghosts of Scottish warriors are trapped in the mists outside of Darkplace,
and they've killed the 2 people having sex, and they're causing trouble. They're turning people's hair red. They're leaving porridge on the ground.
It's so fun, I think, because it's like managing. It's poking fun at the English Scottish relations within the United Kingdom, both in terms of like the silly stereotypes that English people have about Scottish people, but also in terms of like the Scottish propensity to become very, very like defensive and like uptight about Scottishness as a thing. And I think it's something that, and it's one of like, any of my friends will tell you, it's like one of my bugbears. I saw a meme on Twitter the other day that it was like, and I'll preface this by saying I like Scottish people and I think Scottish culture is cool. But it was like
some of my best friends are Scottish.
The only problem with, I think, Scottishness within the UK as it operates is that, like, you know, sensible English people will admit that the English suck. Like, no, and I think, you know, Scotland needs to get to that point. They need to admit that they were doing imperialism with us. It wasn't being done to them.
the Panama thing just didn't work out, man. It's just the way she blows.
They were not the victims. They were very much in the back of the limo with us. It wasn't the English who were doing this stuff. It was very much all of us and the Welsh. Like, there was no, like, Braveheart was not a documentary. Like, that, and so
I don't know. I think the Stone of Destiny needs to be repatriated right now. It was an insult to see that with the so-called king.
The one fun fact I think about the filming behind the scenes of Braveheart is that the crafty table was just nothing but Coke floats.
I said, well, William Wallace loved a Coke float. It was, you know, Scotland was the only place where you could make a Coke float at the time because it was cold enough that they didn't need, you know, refrigeration technology.
Well, and back then,
came right out of the cow's teat.
Yeah, before vanilla, you know, for the ice cream, they just flavored it with woad.
Yeah, you'd have a blue ice cream Coke float. Woad.
That's more of a Michigan thing, I guess. But
we call that a Michigan Coke float.
At this point, Rick reminisces about his time in Scotland.
He goes full H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
I was on a budget flight to Norway when a storm hit and forced us to ditch in Glasgow Prestwick. I was stranded. And it's so hilly up there you can't get any signal on your car phone. It looked bad. It looked like I was going to have to spend the night in Glasgow. Jesus Christ. The cabin crew suggested we all go out and club it. I had no option. There was that or one of their B&Bs. I figured it'd be safer on the streets. For the first time ever, I saw the Scotch in their natural habitat, and it weren't pretty. I'd seen them huddling in stations before being loud, but this time I was surrounded. Everywhere I went, it felt like they were watching me. Fish-white flesh puckered by the Highland breeze, tight eyes peering out for fresh meat, screechy, booze-soaked voices hollering out for a taxi to take them halfway up the road to the next all-night watering hole. A shatter of glass, a round of applause, a 16-year-old mother of three vomiting in an open sewer, Dan's looking on, chewing on potato cakes. I ain't never going back. Not never.
Hardly ever. Yeah.
This is a big moment for Garth to be like, I'm taking my heroic character and giving him this horrible bigotry that is not at all based on a night that I spent in Glasgow.
Right, of course.
Not at all, no sir.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he's like, I've had some bad feelings, but I've worked through them because I'm educated. Unlike you, you look like a dropout. You look like you're the average British racist. I'm hitting on something real here.
Scotch missed some thought was fairly racist. I didn't, to be honest. Thing is, I'd play anything. A Nazi, anything at all. I don't think I'd ever kiss another man. You know, not even for the big boy.
And it has, the comedy in this show has the same effect on me as I Think You Should Leave does, which is it briefly rewires your brain to think about sentences in an entirely different way.
Because the implication there, of course, like, not even the big boys, is that he is actually sexually attracted to men. Like, there would be a reason for him to want to kiss the big boys, but he wouldn't, though.
Right.
That's just a line that he has drawn for his career and for himself.
Right.
Well, I presume what he's saying there is not even if the big boys were asked, like, not even like for a big money role is what he means.
Sure.
Like if Spielberg asked me to kiss a boy,
boys were who he had to kiss. He means not even for the big boys.
But I think you can read it that way too. I feel like the ambiguity might be there for a reason. I don't know.
There's a funny, I don't know. I mean, like for the big boys, it's just a funny.
It's funny. It's just a funny phrase. Yeah.
Like I say, there's like a powerful lobby in Hollywood that wants you to kiss men.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a bold new wing of the Jewish conspiracy, which is not real. I know there's some people with crazy views out there. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, Graham, if you're listening, it's not true.
Yeah, don't latch onto a new thing.
Yeah. We don't need you to be even more things than you already are.
Is there like the conspiracy theory version of like charcoal that you could just feed to a conspiracy theorist and it'll just attach everything else to that, and then it'll like remove the toxins from their body and they can just think about ancient aliens or something?
Yeah, like the methadone of conspiracy theories. We need to get them onto a harmless thing, like being a Welsh hotep. The moon landing was fake.
Right.
Australia's not real, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they can stop, doing just weird stuff about trans people and the Jews or whatever.
Yeah.
And that'll be better for everyone.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, there's something that catches on where people just believe that there aren't any nukes. And it's like, it's so wholesome because like, what do you do with that? You don't do anything. You're just like, oh, okay, there's no more nukes.
Right.
Cool. Great. Everything's fine. No more problems. All that stuff they're doing about the nukes, just psyops. There's no nukes.
Yeah.
It always fizzles out. It kind of comes back every 8 or 9 years because like the message boards will be like, oh yeah, no nukes. This is how I found out there's no nukes. And then there's nowhere else that you can take that, unfortunately. We need to find some way to like give them math problems to do, like flat Earth. Maybe the Nephilim. Maybe it's fine that people are just believing that there's actual giants on mountaintops.
Why not?
If you try to convince them that it's not, the Jews or the transes.
Well,
then
those are the big boys that we were discussing.
There we go.
I wouldn't even kiss a
Kiss a
Nephilim.
Nephilim, no matter what happens.
There you go. So the mist.
No matter how many eyes they have.
That might be a bit close for comfort though, because aren't the Nephilim sort of Jewish giants?
They are Jewish.
So we're getting into dangerous territory again.
Can we do Scotch Nephilim?
Can we make the Nephilim Mormon somehow?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually on that Mormon front, like the Scotch Mist is also kind of playing on a classic Stephen King premise, right? Which is the ancient Indian burial ground, right?
Right.
The sins of
the
our
ancient
colonialism.
Scotch burial
I
ground.
I want to deal with the guilt of our bigotry towards these people by still being weirdly racist, like in Dreamcatcher.
Well, the way that the
my
Scottish
mom's favorite Stephen King novel.
The way that the Scottish people are portrayed in this is very silly. Like they have long, they're red hair. They're all wearing fucking kilts and holding bagpipes and shit like that.
I mean, again, talking about a kind of like the American references in this, it's a very Hollywood. It's the movie Braveheart imagining of Scottish people. Which bafflingly made its way into a kind of modern Scottish consciousness for some people.
Sure. That's the power and allure of nationalism. It doesn't matter where it comes from, it seems.
That's true.
Yeah. What's beautiful about this, I think, is it's taking this very silly, because it's like even like something like the word Scotch, like it's not, it's kind of like it's not the preferred term.
Right.
Like people would say, Scottish people would say Scottish, and Scotch is this kind of like old timey, and I think Scottish people would bristle a bit if you refer to them as Scotch, but it's all like so low stakes. Like it's so funny to be like doing this where it's kind of like, like imagine if there was a slur for Scottish people, this kind of like funny, like I love this as a way of like just lampooning prejudice by just taking such a silly example.
It's like when Nate Bethea came on our show to listen to episodes of Adventures in Odyssey, and they came up with a slur for people from cities on the show. They referred to them as sitters. And so they made a big point about like urban rural dynamics and the way, and it was like, oh yeah, what if people from like a town where there's like 500 people were really prejudiced against people who were from cities? Wouldn't that be just like racism? And it's doing the same thing here, just in a different way.
Yeah. In Man to Man with Dean Lerner, the first episode, he interviews Garth Marenghi. And Marenghi has just finished a movie where he plays a bug scientist whose last name is also Douglas.
Hell yeah.
But he is fighting against an army of wasp human hybrids that have been created by the Dutch, which he believes is actually happening in the Netherlands because in 10 years the Dutch will go to war with England.
Okay.
And it's like, and now he's based. Like that is 100% true.
Well, also wasps killed his beloved dog Skipper.
Exactly.
Right, of course,
And,
yes.
and why do you think those wasps even found his dog? The Dutch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like Garth Marenghi went to go see A Little Life and was just like, fuck the Dutch forever.
Rick does end up facing off with the redheaded ghosts of the mist, and he offers them a shortbread, which I don't quite get this joke. I'm assuming there's something going on.
It's a Scottish
here.
biscuit, shortbread. It's a very it's a tourist thing.
But is there anything beyond that?
Shortbread
or
with salt.
It's just
May I
like
offer you this shortbread? Well, because and then the salt is just like it's like nonsense. But I mean, again, it's like I guess it would be an internal stereotype in the UK that like Scottish people eat bad food they eat badly, and so like the idea of like the Scottish putting salt on a sweet biscuit is just like funny. As obviously they wouldn't do that, but it's the kind of I think it's loosely playing on that, but it's partly just surrealist.
Gotcha. And then as a result of that, Rick is given a bagpipe and kilt in return. That's the gift that he received from the Scottish ghosts.
We have a lot of episodes that end, or maybe it's all the episodes end with Douglas
on
the roof of the hospital. He's alone. You know, he always steps away from everyone else and gets his moment of solitude where he contemplates things.
Yeah.
And so here they just do. This is the end of The Inner Light, the Star Trek Next Generation episode where Picard gets that little flute.
Right.
He's just doing that, but Garth Marenghi is standing on the roof playing the bagpipes, embracing his inner Scotch man.
There's a 50% chance for a Scotsman and an Englishman to get along if they meet. That's what I learned from this episode.
There's so much like petty nationalism and stuff that goes on, but like actually our cultures are incredibly similar because we've been like one country for a really long time, and like there's sort of like there are much more similarities than there are differences. I mean, I go to Scotland every year for the Edinburgh Festival. I always have a good time. As funny as I do find Scottish nationalism as a political tendency, but overall, like Scotland as a place, super fun, nice people. You know, it's a fun culture. I think like the Scottish humor is pretty. I don't know if you guys have ever waded into Scottish Twitter as a phenomenon, but
for sure.
You know, was it McDonald's, ordered 4 Cokes, the lady says, do you need a cup holder? I say, aye, I do, I'm not an octopus. Like, you know.
We've solved a lot of problems now. Garth, has let us know about these solutions. There's one last problem that we have yet to solve, though. And that is the problem of people who turn into vegetables, and love also.
And the agonizing fear of being known.
Yes. Episode 6 deals with a woman who Sanj, Matt Berry, falls in love with. This is a woman who has encountered some green air, and it's turning her slowly but surely into broccoli.
This episode is called The Creeping Moss from the Shores of Shoggoth.
Yes. And they're all driving in the car. They're talking about what food they want to get, and we get this interaction.
What are you doing for dinner tonight, Liz?
Oh, nothing really. Why are you asking me out?
No. Just trying to get some recipe ideas. Finding food a real bore at the moment.
What I do is sometimes get a tin of soup, heat it up, poach an egg in it, serve that with a pork pie sausage roll.
I'll get a wimpy.
You're called, Dak?
There's so many things going on here.
Yeah, can you help me out?
But help us break this down as 3 Americans. Please translate this for us.
I mean, okay, so like the dynamic between like her obviously being excited at the idea that he's going to ask her out, and him being
that's
no,
great.
I'm just after recipe ideas. Beautiful. And then like just Sanchez being a weird guy, right? Soup, poaching an egg in it. We're all fine. I mean, it's weird, but we all understand what it means there.
What's even better is their callback later where he preps that for the broccoli lady.
Oh, right, great. Yeah. It's very funny that he says, serve it with a pork pie sausage roll. So a pork pie and a sausage roll are both kind of well-known British snack foods. You can buy them in Greggs or whatever.
Sure.
But there's no such thing as a pork pie sausage roll.
Got it.
It's just like a weird, just running. Is it like I think so much of this show consists in just people talking slightly weird.
Yes.
Like he means serve it with a pork pie and a sausage roll, but for some reason he says a pork pie sausage roll. And then the beautiful line of, I'll get a wimpy.
Yeah.
So Josh and I were talking about Wimpy yesterday.
Yeah, we really did a deep dive into this. Yeah,
it is actually an American burger chain, but it's only really survived in the UK and South Africa. Weirdly, when those are the two places where your thing is going on, there's nothing untoward happening.
Is Wimpy named after the Popeyes character? Is that
Sure
right?
is. Yeah, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, but they don't offer credit.
Right. Yeah, so it's still around in the UK. I mean, there's not many of them, but it's like a kind of weirdly old school burger place. Like they used to give you like China plates and stuff.
Wow.
Okay.
What?
But it's kind of like McDonald's-y vibes quality-wise, but it's just, it's very strange. Like, it's the kind of thing like where they had one on by our old studio in Whitechapel, which is on like a really shitty market. Like, it's like between all these like tat shops and there's just a Wimpy burger there. They had one in the bowling alley of the shit town in Essex where I grew up. Yeah, and it's just such a, I think something which this show and some other British comedies do really well is picking a perfect point of reference that's just so like he could have said anything. He could have said I'll get a McDonald's or whatever, but like there's something so funny about getting a Wimpy as the first like there's something about the Rick Douglas, his first port of call if he doesn't know what to eat is he'll get a Wimpy.
Well, and it tells us yet another thing about Garth Marenghi too and who he is, right?
It strikes me that it would be like a Carl's Jr. being like your go-to burger, or like a Jack in the
I
Box,
think it's like that,
like a McDonald's. That's wonderful. So many layers here. The thing that really struck me about this episode is that Garth Marenghi being such a narcissist, that the final episode of the series would be given not really to him, but to Lucien Sanchez, like to a side character is the one who gets to experience this great tragedy of love. And it essentially creates what I think is a backdoor pilot for Toast of London, because it follows the structure of Toast of London to the point that where even Matt Berry gets a song.
This is a very Matt Berry episode because it also feels a lot like it's not quite as stream of consciousness, but it's like Snuffbox where he like has a song every single episode, right? And so we get one of these very this is an homage to like Miami Vice, right? It's sort of the brooding close up of him as the car is driving along perfectly stationary in a black curtained void, and then we end up in this like music video bar.
It's great.
With Dean Lerner as the bartender, and it feels like he's trying to get into like publishing music as well. Like it's like his idea of diversifying his portfolio.
This whole song is so good.
Yeah, we've got the clip. Let's just play it.
Why won't she be mine? I wish I was more attractive like Douglas. Still, one can only dream.
I'm a one-track lover. A two-way lane, driving fast down the highway, must have been insane, 'cause the temperature's too high, traveling way too fast, and I knew our loving was too hot to last. She's smooth, like ice, cold to the touch, and it isn't very nice when you left alone. Your lady treats you bad, leaves you hanging on the phone. Take off, shove your loving in the wheel, put the pedal to the floor, 'cause you're heading for the hills. Got to get away, can't take it no more. Man, you don't need this, leave her at the door. The door. Sanch, open the door. Open the door, Sanch.
That rap is very Pet Shop Boys, isn't it? It's kind of West End Girls, that kind of thing, right?
Definitely. I mean that song. I mean, again, it meets my test for musical comedy, which is it kind of goes. You know,
it totally goes.
Oh hell yeah!
Yeah, it's got something to it, and then it's got that very strong like 80s like power ballad type pastiche going on there. The Vanilla Ice kind of rap segment, perfect.
So otherwise, like what goes on in this episode is the plot of Troll 2. You just have people turning into vegetation. This woman is slowly becoming broccoli.
The broccoli is an analogy for AIDS. That is made explicit.
Yeah, Dr. Sanchez decides that it's worth it, and he's going to have sex with her.
Right.
And he hides it from everyone else.
Rick and Sanchez get in a fight. There's a great little visual gag there where they cut the same shot of them going into the fight 3 straight times from 3 different angles. It's all dubbed over really poorly. At the end of the day, what happens is that Rick realizes that they need to boil the lady because, again, she's broccoli. She does end up dying. She perishes. Sanchez has his moment. And in a nice little callback, Stephen Merchant, the chef, shows up to cart her body away because they're going to, use the broccoli.
And then they have to cut off Dr. Sanchez's penis, which is why this episode is not about Garth Marenghi. Garth Marenghi would not have his penis cut off.
Right.
So the important thing here is that someone has to, and as I said, I mentioned this earlier on, this is the section that they get to where they lost the reel of film in a very illuminating and hilarious bit of interview dialogue with Dean Lerner, where he reveals what happened, and he's like partly just reading from a cue card and expressing his regrets at what happened to the film.
Yeah, and as Linda breathed her last green breath, the cloud disappeared, much like the Scotch mist did last week, is a direct quote here. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. At the end, after the big final salute from Rick, Garth says, "With this show, I wanted to make people laugh and cry and shit themselves at the same time." And he also says, as a horror writer, I don't hope for much. I just hope I've changed the way you think about life. And that's Darkplace.
And speaking of Dreamcatcher, there is a Dreamcatcher in this episode.
That's true.
Yeah.
Or at least something they call a Dreamcatcher, except it's
just
a fucking wind chime, which Dreamcatchers are not at all. They hang flat on the wall.
Yeah, so that wraps up the show.
Yeah, Matthew Holness has been publishing more work as Garth Marenghi. He's got another book coming out in October. He's going to be doing a book tour as Garth in November across the UK. So we might see more Garth Marenghi soon. Was it of its time? Was it ahead of its time? What can we take away from this? And I guess looking at Darkplace as a whole, what do we find here that's interesting, that jumps out, that maybe gives us something that we can take away beyond just a lot of laughs, which it has that too?
I mean, I think ahead of its time or not is an interesting question because comedy shows, particularly on British TV, got so much worse after this. Sort of calling it ahead of its time would almost be like an insult.
Right.
Because it's so sui generis and it's so its own thing that it kind of sits outside, I think, like the stylistics of. I think it hasn't dated. I think that would be something you could say about it. It feels, other than perhaps some of the production values and stuff, it feels like a modern, like you could make it today and people wouldn't be like, this feels like a weird show from 20 years ago. Like it has that because it has that timeless. It's satirizing a particular thing which is still well known in the culture and so on. And I think it's a relic of a time when British TV channels would invest money in making weird avant-garde stuff, which they just don't do anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to pick something up from the Fringe Festival and give it this kind of treatment where it really is just so holistically delivered. Is unimaginable in the United States for sure. But to think that there is any point where this happened ever anywhere is
it happens in the UK still, but in a bad way. Like they'll pick stuff up from the Fringe Festival, but it'll be something shit. And it'll be something that's like derivative of, because now it's all about like, what's going to be the new Fleabag.
Right.
And I think that was sort of like the last successful one that comes to mind for me, at least. When
no
it comes
one will
to
take a risk on anything anymore, do anything interesting. It's all like every new show has to be like a carbon copy of a successful show that's already happened.
And I don't think that's unique to British television either. I mean, this is just a problem in the industry more broadly, especially now with the writers' strike going on.
The bean counters are in charge.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what they want. They want carbon copies, right?
Because writers getting stuffed into small rooms where there's not much money to lose on paying them in the first place, to just put out some other thing that people will watch while their eyes glaze over, and not something that's going to make people stand up and go, oh shit, I like that. I want derivatives of that new thing, you know?
Milo, thank you so much for coming on, spending a lot of time with us to talk about a great show.
Great to reminisce about Darkplace.
Yeah, reminiscences, things of that nature. If folks want more of you, where can they find it?
If you want to be buddies, I'm on Twitter's my big one. I'm on Twitter at Milo_Edwards. I'm on Instagram at the same if you're an Instagram person. I do a host of podcasts, Trashfuture, which is a kind of comedy podcast about like politics and tech and the future, and Masters of Our Domain, which is a comedy show about Seinfeld. No Seinfeld knowledge required, genuinely. The extent to which we discuss Seinfeld is grossly exaggerated by the premise of the podcast. Josh has been on both.
That's true.
And also I have a stand-up comedy special out on YouTube. It's called Pindos. If you put in Milo Edwards Pindos, you can check that out. It's all about the 3 years that I spent in Russia.
It was funny. I watched your comedy special, and then as literally the second it ended, I got a DM from you saying, "Hey, I heard you wanted to come on Masters of Our Domain," and I was like, "Yeah, he knows." No, but it's really, really lovely. The final image of I'm not going to spoil, but the final image of that stand-up special is so fucking good, and made me belly laugh. And it also, you're just such an excellent storyteller. Like it is really just a wonderful, wonderful watch. So please go get thee to YouTube.
Yes.
And watch the great Milo Edwards.
So check out all of the links in our description. There will be links to Milo's shit. There will be links to our exciting new t-shirts. We're making t-shirts. You can buy our t-shirts, buy our shirts. Do it.
Oh, yeah.
And also go to our Patreon, patreon.com/worstofall. $5 a month gets you access to our bonus episodes. $10 a month gets you access to the unscripted monthly Lads Cast, where we shoot the shit about what's ever on our mind. Now we've done the plugs. AJ.
At the end of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, the champion of the show, Dean Lerner, the man who we have seen scream exposition down the barrel of the camera for the last 2.5 hours that the series runs, gives his final, it's not even an impassioned plea, it is just a statement of fact in his brain. Garth's place in history is assured. His place in history is assured. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.